Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
You got Luke.
Luke, we're taking a look at how solar panels are made today.
I can't believe we haven't done this one before.
Yeah, I know we've talked about solar energy in some capacity.
See what you did there?
Yeah, but I don't think we talked about how they're made.
I don't think we have either.
All right, let's start out with a fun fact. You ready?
I love fun facts.
The Earth intercepts 173,000 terawatts.
I don't even know what that is.
10,000 times more power than the planet's population uses. That's a lot.
I saw, where was it? I have another fun fact to add to your fun fact.
You're doubling down on the fun facts.
I am. So there's enough solar energy hitting the Earth every hour to meet all of humanity's power needs for an entire year.
Yeah.
So 1 hour of sunlight powers every living being's need for power for a year.
I'm pretty sure we mentioned this one before. I think we talked about
I don't remember
this.
that specifically.
Yeah.
But that's...
Or maybe it was with respect to wind power.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
like,
that is crazy.
It makes me think, why isn't like everybody doing solar?
Yeah.
And I think we'll get to a little bit why, perhaps.
I don't know. Maybe we will.
We'll see.
If we stop giving fun facts, we'll probably have time to do that.
We probably will.
All right. So although solar panels are made up of a whole bunch of parts, roughly 6.
That's not really a whole
many.
bunch.
The photovoltaics are really the big part of things.
And they're much smaller. So like when you think of a solar panel, this thing's like, a couple feet by a couple feet. Those of you on the other side of the pond, it's a couple meters by a couple meters. I don't know.
Give or take.
But there's individual photovoltaic cells that are like 4 inches.
Yeah, they're not real big.
Yeah, they're not super big, and they put them in a
strap
series,
them together.
right?
Yeah, they strap them all together. But why silicone?
I think because it's the most abundant material on the planet that's capable of producing the photovoltaic effect.
There you go. So it's a non-metal thing. It has conductive properties that gives it the ability to convert sunlight into electricity. Some might call that the photovoltaic effect.
And that is the excitation of an electron or another charge carrier to a higher energy state. So basically what happens with the photovoltaic effect in the cell is you're just moving electrons from a positive side to a negative side.
Yeah, it initiates that flow. What was it? Did you say it was like water flowing?
Yeah.
Was that what it was last time?
I don't know if that's how you describe electricity flowing.
All right. So, like you said, light is absorbed, it knocks an electron loose. The loose electron flows, creating a current. That's the noise it makes. One more time. Yeah, I like that one. And the current is captured and transferred to wires. And we're going to actually get into how it's captured as we get into how these things are actually made.
And this is not to be confused with thermal solar effects, because I never knew this. Like whenever I was doing it, there's
what?
There's actually thermal. I forget. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but there's other panels that rely on the heat that's produced rather than the electricity transfer.
But you don't know anything about it or what they're called.
No, I'm drawing a blank.
That might have been one of those things we could have just not mentioned.
Yeah, I feel dumber
that was
having
good, though.
mentioned it.
I didn't realize those were a thing, so maybe I shall Google's them.
Yeah.
So the parts of a solar panel, Luke: silicone, solar cells.
Yep.
Metal frame.
Yep.
Typically like an aluminum or maybe an aluminium, depending.
Aluminium.
Where you are. Glass sheets for the casing. Standard wire, 12 volt. Bus wire. What's the difference? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Me neither.
I think the bus wire connects them in series, I believe.
And plexiglass.
That's like the substrate. That's the base on like the backside.
I noticed as I was going through how they're made, and we'll get into the details here shortly, that there's also some other things like adhesive and other stuff like that, and a lot of paints, metal paints that are used that they don't mention in this quick list. But if you're looking at the high-level stuff, that's what's going on.
It's basically a sandwich.
A
sandwich of materials.
What's your favorite kind of sandwich or sandwich?
I would honestly say my favorite sandwich is probably the Earl of Sandwich down in Disney. There's a roast beef and cheddar with horseradish.
Roast. Well, that's a good choice.
It's a really good choice. Trust me.
I'm a big pastrami fan myself.
That's a good one, too.
Love pastrami.
It's a
Have you
very
ever
good
been to Katz Delicatessen
No,
in New
I
York?
haven't. I heard they closed.
No.
I heard they closed after like 1 billion years in business.
Wow, I'll have to look into that. Okay, so
Yeah.
away from sandwiches. So in addition to the solar cells, a standard solar panel includes the glass, and that's used for the front of the panel to add durability and protection. And under the glass exterior, the panel has a casing for insulation and the protective back sheets, which help limit the heat dissipation and the humidity. It reduces the humidity inside of the panels as well, because all of those things are bad. Just kind of like in your house, you know, you don't want all that stuff. So this is like the home for the solar panels.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you like that?
I
Not
wasn't.
so much?
No,
Okay.
I wasn't. That's all right.
Thanks for the honesty.
That's all right.
The insulation is particularly important, Luke, because temperature increases will lead to a decrease in efficiency. So that's why that's so important.
That's also why when you see these solar panels mounted on like residential homes, there's an air gap underneath so that the air can pass underneath the roof so heat doesn't build up.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
I always wondered why they didn't like mount them flush. I was like, oh, they got these big, ugly, they stick up like, 8-10 inches. Like, why do they do that? And it's all airflow underneath the panel.
Interesting. So because of that, though, right, the PV manufacturers go to extra lengths to ensure the light's being captured without overheating, like you're saying. So they give those gaps. They have the way they're manufacturing them. They're using materials that are reducing the heat, all of these things to make them as efficient as possible. And you probably have some stats on this, and I do later as well, but they're not really efficient. Like, I thought it was like the sun hits it, it turns it into energy, pablamo. It's like 20% or something.
And that's where those coatings that you talked about come into play, and the paints that they apply to these, because number one, you want it to absorb as much of the light as possible, but it also absorbs heat. So there's like a reflectivity issue. Like, you don't want to reflect too much because you want to absorb the energy, but if you reflect all of it to keep it cool, it won't be that efficient. So it's kind of this balance between absorption and reflection that is super critical. And that's where the really expensive ones, like the difference between expensive solar panels and cheap solar panels, like the efficiency is like crazy different. Like it's definitely one of those, what you pay for is what you get. You go cheap, you're going to get poor efficiency, and you're going to get poor longevity. If you pay more, it's going to have better efficiency, but still not great overall.
I have a breakdown of the three main options that you can go with, and kind of like the quality, like you're saying, and I'll get into those a little bit later.
I have a fun fact.
Oh, I want to hear a fun fact.
The very first solar cell, consisting of layers of selenium with a thin film of gold, was experimented by Charles Fritz in 1884.
1884?
That's crazy.
Did they even know the sun existed back then?
Well, the Earth was flat back then.
Oh,
It didn't turn round until after that. But as you would expect, crazy inefficient.
Yeah. Well, people back then were bad at stuff. Or they were just still learning what was going on.
Could be that.
Okay, before we get into how these things are actually made in the deets, that's what the kids say, let's take a break for a word from our sponsor.
I have to assume it's one of these solar panel manufacturers.
I was going to say it's Sun Edison, who I used to invest in, and then they went bankrupt and I lost all my money, so thank you for that. But no, it is no one, in fact. But we do have some shout-outs.
Oh, let's hear it.
Shout-out number 1, Jeff D. is teaching engineering at high school for all those engineering high schoolers up in Canada, eh?
Oh, up in the Great White North.
Says we do a pretty good job of, pushing the trades. You do a good job on that, as well as getting them ready to understand what the different flavors of engineering are for. So thank you for that,
I think
Jeff.
the other thing that we teach, James, is that you can be an engineer and be extremely cool.
And funny.
Because exactly.
And good looking.
Well, yeah.
If you watch us on the YouTubes. At least half of us are.
half of us are.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's probably more what we bring.
I think so too.
Is there's no stigma to being an engineer.
Right. Stigma. Second shout out, Chris MG, we're going to call him.
Okay.
He can't leave us a review because he listens on Spotify. So we hate you, Chris MG.
What's up with Spotify?
I don't know. Apparently there isn't an option to leave reviews.
Just go over to iTunes and give us a review. How hard could it be? Come on, Chris.
He doesn't have a iPhone.
Oh.
Yeah. See, I actually know Chris. That's why I know this is how it works.
This is one of your boys.
Yeah. Good friend.
Okay.
Good listener to the show.
Okay.
Often tells me things that I did wrong. So
Okay.
thanks, Chris. That's it for the shout-outs this week. But if you would like a shout-out, if you want to tell me something we did wrong, or you just want to chat, email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com.
And if you want some sweet stickers,
that
make
too.
sure you review, subscribe, give us proof that you've done both of those things and like a screenshot or an email, and we would be happy. Not we, more James, would be happy to send
Yeah.
you out some stickers.
I don't even require that anymore. So long as you ask for them, I figure
Oh.
you're good enough.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm generous like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, subscribe and all that. Especially just listen.
Yeah.
And give us money. Wait, no. Moving on. How
Alrighty.
are solar panels made?
So, it's a pretty crazy process, and as usual, I didn't watch any videos or cut and paste anything from.
You actually went out there and manufactured one
did.
yourself to learn.
I went to the beach.
I
I dug up
remember.
some sand because that's what silica essentially is.
Ish.
So, do you want to do this, or do you just going to kind of go back and forth?
Hey man, how about you do it and I'll just chime in with anything.
So the
'cause it
very
looks like
first,
you have a lot
so
going
the very
on.
first thing that happens is you got to start with sand. This is basically silica. It's what it starts with, and the sand itself needs to be purified. So
They don't just like scrape it off the beach though, right? They have
No.
like a quarry.
Query.
Quarry? A quarry.
They have a quarry that
they dig the rocks out of.
Yeah, that they plant it and then they harvest it from. Yes, way to go, James. So basically, they take this and they need to put this in an arc furnace, and it gets a crazy high temperature, like
Over 2,000 degrees.
2,000 degrees
C's.
which is like a billion
I
in
mean, that's like
Fahrenheit.
the sun, I
I'm
assume.
fairly certain. So gets it super hot and basically turns this into molten silica. And this is the part I didn't know. They basically turned this into a giant ingot of silica. It looks like aluminum almost when you look at
I
the
thought
pictures.
that was really strange as
I
well.
didn't realize they did that. I thought they poured it in thin sheets and then like sanded it or something.
I didn't know what they did. I didn't know how they would get it into those sheets. But if you look at it, they do have, like you're saying, a giant, and not like one of those like what you think a gold brick ingot
No.
looks like a giant.
This thing's like the size of a
thing.
car engine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
They're-
huge.
They're big, and what that does whenever they heat it up is it knocks out all the impurities. So what they end up with is pure silicon in an ingot form whenever it cools. So once it cools, they take this enormous ingot, and what they have to do now is they have to process this into different shapes and sizes that they can then turn into wafers. So whenever they're doing the processing, so if you imagine you got this 24 by 24 by 24 inch block, they cut this down into roughly 4 by 8 kind of rectangular shapes, and these are like sub ingots or smaller components. And they just do this
Sub ingots.
a sub ingot. Yeah, I don't know. And then what they do with these is this is done with basically just a bandsaw. Nothing fancy. They just run this thing on a bandsaw.
Right.
Get it into basically these kind of brick shape pieces of pure silica. Then they have to do this thing called wafering.
Yeah.
And this was bananas. I assumed that they just had laser beams and went like pew 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 and like cut these things in half with lasers. They used like string or something.
It's like razor wire.
Yeah.
Like tons and tons of razor wire that they run it through like you have like those cheese wires, you know?
And you pull on them.
Yeah,
That's exactly
it's
what
like
it is.
that. That's
But-
basically what they're doing.
which is crazy
Yeah.
because number one, you'd think they'd break.
you would.
You would also think that you'd have really inconsistent thicknesses, but the machine that they do it on, I did watch a video, I have to admit. It's like cutting cheese with like 1,000 cheese wires, and what they end up with is it's about the thickness of a fingernail. I forget what
Yeah.
the exact dimension is, but it's
I
about
think that's the technical measurement.
technical.
Yeah.
It's about the thickness of a fingernail, and the crazy part is these have to be taken apart by hand because
Yeah, and washed by
the
hand, too.
surface tension of them, even though they're cut, you can't just pull them apart, and it needs to be done by hand because they're super fragile. So they don't really have a great, they break very easily. So it needs to be pulled apart by hand, like you said. They need to be washed by hand, and they have this really cool kind of like shiny, like if you open up a geode. Did you ever get a geode when you were a kid?
I never got a geode.
You cut them open, so they're super shiny. They got this kind of cool texture to them that almost looks like camouflage.
I felt it looked like carbon fiber, kind of.
Yeah,
the
it did.
Weave.
And if we're gonna have a carbon fiber. If it's not up, there's gonna be a carbon fiber
That's right.
episode. Make sure you check it out.
Check it out. See how I teed you up for that one?
You did.
Yeah.
Teed it up.
Teed it up. Did you see that the molten stuff, it comes out, it's in that over 2,000 degrees C furnace. They actually, when they pour it out to cool it, everything that they pour it on has to have cold water running through it
cooling
to
channels.
keep it from melting everything that it touches because it's that hot.
2,000 degrees.
That's nuts. So what happens after we take our cheese slicer thing and slice off these wafers? I know they wash them, but then there's more to the process, right?
Yeah, so they have to add anti-reflective coatings.
Anti-reflective coatings.
Because they don't want it, and this is that balance that I talked about. And the washing is really important. One of the biggest problems, and when you see these pictures of these manufacturing facilities, like everybody's wearing like hair nets and gloves and those crazy suits, is our oil on our hands and like our skin and like anything that touches these really affects the efficiency of these panels. So these are almost treated like the way like microchips are treated.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have these super clean rooms where you're working with these wafers. So they clean them and then they add anti-reflective because they want this balance between reflection and absorption. And they also paint the sides different colors to aid in this.
Yeah, did you see that blue shade? I'm guessing everybody knows what they look like, but if you look at a solar panel, typically you see like a kind of cool blue color.
It changes color whenever you tilt it.
Yeah, and that's actually added there so that it can absorb more light and therefore obviously produce more electricity. Maybe they should find a better blue so it absorbs even more since
Maybe
they're
they
so
should.
inefficient. Okay, so they're cleaned again, right?
Yep.
And this is when they're then sent through a machine and they're painted with a thin layer of metal. Yeah. Which is kind of interesting.
And it's usually silver because I didn't know this.
Is that what it is? Is silver?
Silver is the best conductor like known to man or something like that.
Really?
Yeah, I read that it's typically silver.
So they're painted with metal like silver, and that's helping conduct electricity to send it then through the grid.
Yeah.
So that's how it goes from the solar panel to the wire grid. And so the panels are then assembled in rows and connected back together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then a machine pieces them all together, like a puzzle.
That's the noise it makes?
That is.
Okay.
Yep. You must not have heard the sound of the machine.
I didn't.
It starts with a layer of glass. Whap. It puts down some adhesive paper or adhesive paper.
Yep.
Slaps the silicone wafers on there, real violent like, I'm sure, to keep them broken.
Actually, it's not violent. It's very specific and deliberate.
Okay. And then more adhesive to add it together. And then, whammo, they add a metal frame on that thing. And it's good to go on your roof, right?
No.
No? Still not?
No.
Oh, okay.
So once these panels are made, basically they have these little, pigtails coming out. And
pigtails.
They need to be inverted. So the power coming out of these solar panels is DC. So an inverter is required. And the other thing, too, is most solar panels don't power things directly. So it's not like I have a solar panel connected to my TV and it powers my TV. the way most solar panels, and I kind of thought that sometimes, like,
really?
if I had solar panels on my house, it would just power my house. And I thought, oh, well, what does it do when it gets dark? What it really does is solar panels charge deep cell batteries, which is a whole nother thing we could probably talk about at some point in time, which I think we did an episode on how batteries work.
We did.
Not specifically deep cell batteries.
No, there was no deepness of that episode.
But basically they charge up these batteries and maintain the charge, and then your house or your car or your office or whatever you're using to consume that power runs off the batteries, which has been inverted. And that is how solar panels. Powers. That's how a solar panel is born.
That is.
That's how it comes into the world.
No mommy and daddy solar panels.
No.
Just manufacturing.
Yep.
That's beautiful. I thought you did a great job there.
Thank you, James. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Speaking of which, how about we take another break for this week's Luke's Rant?
Yeah, so the rant is going to be directly related to the next thing we're going to talk about is why are these things so stupidly expensive? So, interesting fact, solar panels have come down, what's the number? They've come down 99% since 1977, and they're still expensive. So those of you that bought solar panels in 1977, I'm sorry. But I just don't understand if this is the most renewable energy on the planet, if this is something that is the cheapest when you think of cost per kilowatt, which it is, I'm pretty sure most of the stats put it that way, versus fossil fuel and hydrogen and like all the other wind options, it's the most price sensitive, or the best price per kilowatt. Why isn't this like a thing?
Yeah, why haven't you come up with a better way, or a more affordable way?
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about all these families that, all the stuff going on in politics is, there's all these families, they're struggling, they don't have money to pay their bills, and put solar panels on their roof and they won't have electricity bills.
I think that all new houses in California require solar panels on the roof.
That's
new
genius.
New builds.
I like that. And now that's gonna obviously raise the cost of the house, but
yeah, but when your house is already $18 billion out there.
So I think there needs, so number one, they're crazy expensive. And even with the tax credits you get, and they're not as good as they used to be, even with the tax credits, they're still pretty expensive, and the payoff isn't that quick, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. But they've just got to come up with a way. There's enough energy in one day to power the world for a year. How can we not turn that into something less expensive?
Yeah, I love that, Luke. That was a great rant.
Yeah, I just don't understand it.
Could feel the passion.
Sorry.
All right, so moving on. The 3 flavors.
So there's flavors of these?
There's flavors. Cherry, blue raspberry, and Mountain Dew. They're like ices, but different. I love ices.
You are the worst.
All right. Monocrystalline solar panels are produced from one large silicone block and are produced in silicone wafer formats, like we were talking about. Yep. The manufacturing process involves cutting them, like we said. Monocrystalline silicone cells are more efficient than polycrystalline or amorphous solar cells. Producing individual monocrystalline wafers is very labor intensive, kind of like we just talked about. And therefore, of course, that means they're more expensive to produce. And they have like a black color to them. So like you were saying, you get what you pay for. If you're really paying for it, that's what you're getting.
Yeah, the good stuff.
The good stuff. Next, polycrystalline solar cells.
Poly meaning more than one, I'm assuming.
Wow. You're like a dictionary and an encyclopedia all in one.
Thank you. I don't know what that means, but
So they're also silicone cells, but rather than being formed from a large block and chopped up, like we talked about, they're produced by melting multiple silicone crystals together. These are less efficient than the monos, but they're also less expensive, and they're kind of a cool blue color. And then last but not least, but actually least,
because they stink.
Yes, the amorphous silicone cells. The cool thing about these are they're flexible solar panel material.
Oh.
So that's really great. So they're often used for thin film solar panels, maybe like the roof tiles or things like that, perhaps. Not like when you get a panel put on your roof, but the actual roofing. They're non-crystalline and get attached to something like glass or plastic or metal, but they're very flexible, so they can be shaped as well. So that's kind of cool. So they're used for a lot of interesting purposes, but they're super, super inefficient compared to both of the other options. So they don't give you a whole lot of energy.
So you know me and my camping, right?
I do know
and
you
my
and your
RVing.
camping.
So
Actually,
these are
check out our episode on camping technology if you
bunch
haven't.
of shameless plugs today.
Yes.
So this is these flexible ones are super popular in the RV industry because you can easily mount it to a curved roof or really anywhere.
There you go.
And the challenge is exactly what you're saying. An equivalent expensive standard panel, might give you, 400 kilowatts or something like that. But you got to put like 9 of these things in series to get that kind of power. And you just don't have enough roof space with all the different vents and different things you have on an RV. But this is really popular with the RVing industry.
I feel like we're really in stride today, Luke.
I'm feeling
Just
it.
feeding off each other.
I'm feeling it.
All right, I'm not even going to give my next fun fact because I see you have it coming up next
I
with
do?
the number of cell panels.
Which one? Oh, yeah. So for a residential home, you need roughly 48 cells per panel. So
For a small residential roof.
yeah, and this is unfortunately in the UK. So
anywhere else it's 2.
anywhere else it's 2, but yeah, because the UK does nothing but rain and be cloudy there. But and these are the individual cells within a panel. So this isn't 48 panels.
Yes.
This is within one cell, and there's 60 cells in a standard panel. And there are 72 cells in what are considered large panels. So essentially, those are going to be, they're going to equal roughly 4 kilowatt hours for the typical home, again, in the UK. So
I feel like that's probably the same for Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, we're basically the UK West, I think, is what we're known for. Good day. We just lost a bunch of listeners.
3. Okay, moving on.
So a couple other things too. So what they do is they're gonna take, in some cases, multiple, panels. They hook these up in series. They bolt them to your roof. If you're thinking of a residential installation, they then get hooked up to an inverter, and then that inverter feeds your deep cell batteries that it runs off of. And that's kind of like the total installation. And I thought to myself, James, hey, Luke, that's what I say when I think to myself, like, how much does this cost? Is this something that I should think about? So
it is something you should think about.
So I did a little bit of research, and in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, my house would need roughly a 10 kilowatt installation in Pittsburgh to totally run my house. So I could replace my furnace with...
You'd still have like a backup generator, right? I assume.
I think you'd need to for power outages and that sort of thing.
For power outages with your solar power?
Yeah.
I'm guessing you still do, in case you were short on sunlight or something.
Yeah,
but
potentially.
okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So a 10 kilowatt installation is what would be needed roughly for my house, and that would be 100% electric house. And
it's electric.
Yeah, and it's going to cost anywhere from $18,000 to $27,000 to purchase and install that in Pennsylvania. So then I started looking and that's a rough average. I started looking at individual companies, and I found this calculator. So it would cost me roughly for that through this particular company, who I'm not going to mention. They had a good price of $13,000. It takes 10 years to get my $13,000 back. But over a 20-year period, I would save $16,000 based off of my current electric bill.
Now, that's assuming none of your stuff breaks, right?
And that's assuming it stays under warranty and there's no maintenance that's required,
So you're going to, over 20 years, you're going to save $16,000?
That's what this calculator says. That seems pretty legit to me.
So now it's going to cost you $13,000. Is that before any tax incentives?
This includes the tax incentives.
Oh, that just got worse.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's still something to think about.
So then you could pay for it, or you could get a loan. So the loan, there's no out-of-pocket initial expense. And over 20 years, you only save about $8,600 because you're financing it, basically.
Yeah, but it's nothing out of pocket?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and if you do a lease where you never own this thing, so basically, like leasing a car, you only save $5,200 because, again, you're getting charged, a higher interest rate on the finance. So
here's where I'm at on this. I'd like to do it. In Pittsburgh, I feel like you're just kind of being that guy if you do it, though, because it takes so long.
Yeah.
But, I think it's a good idea. I'd love for everyone to do it, but they're so ugly. And I think that's why we have our friend Elon.
The Musk.
The Muskers making those nicer-looking roofing tiles, right?
So there's those, and I just saw when I was doing research, they're coming out with ones that are clear.
Ooh.
That would actually just go in your window as window glass.
That's
and
cool.
Your window would be hooked into your inverter and your electrical grid for your house, and just the glass on your... It probably wouldn't work for residential. There's probably not enough surface area. But if you were building an office building and you had a large glass, facade, you could easily power the building with that. So
I feel like if they weren't so ugly, I'd be all in. I'd make the investment and do it.
Yeah. I got a couple...
trying to sell your house again, though.
Yeah, some people
look
don't...
at that.
Yeah, I don't know. I have one fun fact, and I got some pros and cons.
Oh, I have a bunch.
So California is by far the number one, and you mentioned this before, the number one installation in the United States. They, with 19.7 gigawatts installed, and this was the end of 2016, so this is some pretty old stats. My guess is they're probably close to 1.21 gigawatts, is my guess. And you just said new construction, they're requiring it, so that's probably going to even go higher. But
Arizona's also up there as well. But
Yeah.
those are our two sunniest states. So.
Exactly. So there are some cons, though. There are some cons, James.
I want to hear them.
So the first one is the cost. We just talked about it. They have to figure out a way to lower the cost. The average homeowner is not going to shell out, in that example I gave before, $13,000 and not see a break even for 10 years. That's kind of crazy. Most people won't do that. It's weather dependent, depending on where you live. If we have a bad El Nino year and it's not very sunny, you might be buying power to supplement your solar power. So it is very weather dependent. It can't be used everywhere. Storage is crazy expensive. So these batteries that I'm talking about, which wear out, they don't hold charges. So if you think about like the little rechargeable batteries that you buy, they get really inefficient after like 50 uses or 100 uses, and you gotta throw them, you gotta hide them in the garbage when you throw them out and get new ones. But these batteries are really expensive that you basically charge, and they need to be replaced and
I'd
updated.
Imagine.
Yeah, and then the
I
other
bet
thing,
those aren't covered by the warranty.
I guarantee you they're not.
Yeah.
And they're enormous. Like you need like a really
You need
big
another house just to house them.
Yeah. And then there's also architectural considerations, because there's some thermal issues involved with the inverters and the batteries, so you have to now have a climate-controlled room to have these things in. And then there's been some milder, minor stuff with, they say they contribute to pollution, the manufacturing methods.
This is true.
They have that arc furnace they got to crank up and push out some emissions to make the ingots.
I feel like it still would.
It's still better. It's got to be better,
right?
So there are some cons to solar.
Yeah.
So
Couple fun facts to
Shoot.
wrap this up on. Number 1, solar panels measuring 6.6 square meters powered the Stardust spacecraft during its 2.88 billion with a B mile journey that took 7 years.
yeah, but
Solar power.
but the other thing too is they probably made that thing so electrically efficient that it needed no power.
Oh, I'm sure.
Whatever. It probably could run off like half a kilowatt like a month.
You're really killing my marketing here.
A month.
A month. China has the most solar power wattage in the world, followed by Japan, Germany, the U.S., and Italy. So up your game, U.S., but also China's giant. So there's that. And my last one, I thought this was really interesting. ExxonMobil was one of the first companies to research ways to lower solar cell costs, because the company used solar panels to power warning lights on oil rigs. So here I thought it was like being really good, and they're just like, we want to keep our oil rigs safe.
Yeah.
But still pretty interesting that they would be ones that are like driving this.
Yeah, and I also think that these big oil companies, they see the writing on the wall. I mean,
Yeah.
at some point in time, we're going to have to be super mindful with our planet and with our resources. And I think that if you're not at the front end of it,
You're in the back end.
like Elon Musk is a perfect example. Tesla, all these other automotive manufacturers didn't take, battery-powered cars seriously, and Elon did, and look at what he's doing, leader in electric cars. When you had all these other manufacturers that were doing cars way before him, they kind of poo-pooed it, and
Poo-pooed.
look at it now.
Look at it now, Luke.
I think I'm going to look into getting solar panels on my house.
I think you should. I completely support that. And let me know how it goes, and then maybe I'll do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully everyone else is now thinking about getting solar panels on their roof and understand exactly how these are created.
Go solar.
Go solar. Until next time.
See ya.